Good evening, everybody. About one more minute and we'll get going tonight. All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is the top of the hour, so I will call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of Tuesday, September 26th, 2023. Please join me for a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional first people of Sitka. With gratitude, we proceed on Tlingit Ani. Sarah, roll call, please.
Mayor Eisenbach,
Present.
Mr. Mosier,
Here.
Ms. Duncan. Here. Mr. Yestad,
Here.
Mr. Christensen,
Here.
Mr. Pike,
Here.
and Ms. Carlson.
Here.
Are there any correspondence or agenda changes this evening? Seeing none, we do have ceremonial matters this evening. I'll start with a service award for Chris Spivey. Service award on behalf of the City and Borough of Sitka is hereby awarded to Chris Spivey. This expression of grateful acknowledgement for your 11 years of valued service rendered in the public interest while serving on the Planning Commission. Thank you. Signed and sealed on this 26th day of September by myself and the municipal clerk, Sarah Peterson. Chris, if you'd like to join us. Didn't even think about having a little handheld mic for this. I was going to say thank you for your 10 years, but I would have shorted you a year there. 11 years is an incredibly long time to continue on with a public service like that. That's absolutely incredible. While we struggle to fill many of our boards, commissions, and committees, your service has continued. So much appreciated. Take a rest. Get some. You're on Wednesday nights, correct? Get some Wednesday nights back. And there's many other boards, commissions, or committees that could use your service. So much appreciated. If you'd like.
No.
Oh,
Thank you, though.
You've had enough of that, huh?
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Chris, it's been a pleasure serving on that with you for the last 3 or 4 years too. So thank you.
And then tonight we have a proclamation as well. This proclamation is reaffirming Indigenous Peoples Day. Whereas the City and Borough of Sitka recognizes that the indigenous peoples of the lands that would later become known as the Americas have occupied these lands since time immemorial. And whereas the City and Borough of Sitka recognizes the fact that Sitka is built upon the homelands and villages of the Tlingit people who have occupied this land they called Sitka since time immemorial, and without whom the building of the city would not have been possible. And whereas the City and Borough of Sitka values the many contributions made to our community through Indigenous people's knowledge, labor, technology, science, philosophy, arts, and the deep cultural contribution that has substantially shaped the character of the City and Borough of Sitka. And whereas in 2017 and 2022, the Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka passed resolutions 2017-20 and 2022-27, declaring the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day. And this assembly desires to continue those commitments. Now, therefore, the Assembly of the City and Borough of Sitka does hereby proclaim the second Monday in October as Indigenous Peoples Day, firmly commits to continue its efforts to promote the well-being and growth of Sitka's Alaska Native, American Indian, and Indigenous community, and encourages other businesses, organizations, and public institutions to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. Signed and sealed today as well by myself and Sarah Peterson. So thank you to thank you to those who have come before us. We appreciate that, and we will continue to acknowledge October 2nd as Indigenous Peoples Day. Moving on to special reports, government to government. Chairman Widmark. Thank you and welcome. And my apologies for missing your last meeting. As you know, Southeast Conference was going on and we had an event that evening. So I'm sure your meeting ran extremely smooth without me. However, you tend to do a very good job. You're very efficient. I should learn a thing or two.
Ironically, I missed a meeting too. So
it went really well
efficient.
then.
Well, it only took half an hour. So, Mayor and Assembly members wanted to summarize our two meetings in September 6th and September 20th. On September 6th, we met, the tribe met with the FAA and we had a consultation. I thought that went really smooth and very, very informative by the FAA. The tribe approved submitting a grant application for enhancing the traditional foods program for up to amount of 2.5 million to the BIA. The tribe accepted the second quarter financials for 2023. On September 20th, action items, we improved for enrollment. We approved enrollment resolutions and a relinquishment. The tribe designated a location of the upcoming tribal council election, appointed an election supervisor and election judges, accepted the tribal council accepted 2022 financial audit went really well. And the tribe approving of submission of the 2023 Indian Community Development Block Grant application for the Baranof Island Housing Authority. And approve the resolution authorizing the Tribal Transportation Program Improvement Project control schedule for 2023 through 2027. And approved a letter requesting eligibility for the Sitka Tribe of Alaska participating in U.S. DOT Tribal Transportation Self-Governance Program. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for joining me at Southeast Conference as well on the introductory speech. I'm glad I had to go first, get everybody warmed up, but
Right. Thank you.
Thanks. Our next scheduled special report this evening is a Green Lake Hydroelectric Project relicensing update. I understand Elizabeth Lack is here to give us a presentation. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm here just to give a brief overview on the Green Lake hydroelectric project relicensing. My name's Elizabeth Lack. I work for McMillan. We're an environmental and engineering firm based in Boise, but we do a lot of work on hydroelectric projects in the Pacific Northwest and particularly Alaska. There we go. So the Green Lake Hydroelectric Project relicensing, what is that? In March of 1979, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which we refer to as FERC, issued a license to construct and operate the Green Lake Hydroelectric Project. This is a 50-year license, and it's going to expire in March of 2029. So why are we here now? 2029 is a ways out yet. Well, a relicensing process is a fairly complex and lengthy process. It typically takes about 5 to 6 years. So we are getting it started now. This is just a very brief overview on what's involved in a relicensing. We are on this first step now, that is preparing a notice of intent and a pre-application document. A notice of intent simply declares your intention to FERC that you intend to relicense the Green Lake project. And when we submit that notice of intent, we must also submit a pre-application document. This is a rather lengthy document that describes all the existing and known information about the project. This includes things like the existing project facilities, its operation, and also its environmental setting, including all the natural, cultural, and social resources that occur in the area and could be affected by continued operation of the project under the new license. So this must be submitted to FERC at the 5-year mark when the license expires. Excuse me. So this is due March 2024 of next year, and we're working on that now. The next steps in the process are largely related to a study program. FERC requires that you consult with federal and state agencies, tribal corporations, and other stakeholders as you develop a study plan for the project. So we will be reaching out and consulting as required with all the stakeholders involved. We'll develop a study plan, and the study plan is an iterative document. It will be reviewed by the stakeholders, and then we'll revise it based on comments, and the revised study plan will be submitted to FERC. The next step, of course, is implementing the plan. That's when the scientists and technical experts get out in the field, collect their data, do their inventories, that kind of thing. And then, of course, they'll prepare reports on their studies. And finally, we'll take all that information and prepare the license application. That also is an iterative process. Stakeholders will have an opportunity to review and comment on a draft license application, and then we'll prepare a final application that will be submitted to FERC by March of 2027. The reason it's 2027, not 2029, when the license expires, is because FERC has 2 years to review the application. They'll go through their own environmental review process and hopefully issue the new license by 2029. So when we go through a new relicensing, there's opportunities that we can take advantage of. The first one that we see on this particular project is there's a potential for just one study season. Typically, the study seasons take 2 years, but this is a very straightforward project. We don't see a lot of potential impacts based on what we know now. So we're hoping that we can do a single study season for this project, which of course will reduce our schedule and save on cost. We also plan to build on existing quality relationships with stakeholders to promote other potential renewable development. And finally, we want to take this opportunity to reduce the FERC project boundary. You can see on this map right now, it's pretty big. It's that purple area, but a FERC project boundary is typically just the footprint of a project, the reservoir, the dam, the power plant, access roads, transmission line, that kind of thing. And the reason you don't want an excessive project boundaries because it increased your risk. Just as an example, if there was a cultural resource or a rare plant or something like that that's in the purple area, within your FERC boundary, FERC could require you to maybe monitor that resource or prepare a plan to protect it, that kind of thing. So we want to reduce the FERC project boundary. And finally, this is just a very general schedule. Since it's a process, one step can affect the following steps. But as I mentioned, we're at this first step now. We plan to file the notice of intent and pad with FERC by March 31st of next year. Also in 2024, we'll start the study planning process. We'll do the proposed plan and allow that comment review time and submit the revised plan by the end of next year. 2025 is the year we hope to have for the studies. Hopefully it's just that 1 year. It can spill into 2026 as needed. But 2025 will be used not just for the studies themselves, but there's a lot of planning that goes into it. We might have to get some permits. We'll have to work out logistics, that kind of thing. And then, of course, once the studies are complete, there's reporting at the end of the year. 2026, we'll start preparing the draft license application. And again, there's the review and comment process. And we'll prepare that final license application to submit to FERC by 2027. And they'll have their 2 years to review the application and get you a new license by 2029. I think that's about all I have for tonight, just giving you an overview. I'm sure I'll be back to give you updates periodically as we go through this process, but I'd be happy to take any questions. Or I have my contact information on the screen. I can also be contacted through Cord, but thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Any questions for Elizabeth?
Well, I'm not sure if this is for her, Cord, or Scott, but I remember a few years ago being told approximately how much this process cost. Any idea how much it's going to cost us to get relicensed?
You want to take that?
Sure. Let's say initial estimates.
If you can grab the microphone, please.
I'm sorry. Initial estimates are maybe 1.2 million, 1.5 million. It really depends upon whether you have more, one study year or 2 study years, what's required. We think because the project is all on municipal land and it's a low hazard dam. There aren't any habitable structures within the project boundary. It should be fairly straightforward, but you never know. And that's why we're starting that public process now and wanted to inform the assembly.
Yeah, I think I was told 15 years ago or so, it was around 500. So it doesn't surprise me. It's a lot more. And it just, one of the reasons that when people ask me why our electric rates are what they are, things like this. I mean, we get nothing from this. There's not 1 watt of energy is produced because of this permit. And so I understand we have to do it, but it's just.
Yes. Fortunately, it's a process we only have to do hopefully once every 50 years.
Anything else from the assembly? Great. Thank you for your time. I hope you see this project through. I'm sure by 2029, the faces up here will be much different. So appreciate you hanging in there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm moving on special reports this evening. Is there anyone from municipal boards, commissions, committees? Municipal departments? School district? Students and guests? That'll bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item off of tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes. If you could hit the microphone button in the very bottom of the base. There you go. Perfect.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Assembly members, and our guests of the community. I come today as a partner for the
And
Every
sorry to
Child.
interrupt again, but if you could state your name for the record.
Sorry, Krista Perla, and that's spelled Krista. Perla, P as in Paul, ERALA. So, Mr. Mayor and Assembly, I come to you humbly for our Every Child Matters event that's happening on Friday, the 29th. We will be having a parade that starts right out here at the Net Shed, and it will begin, lineup will begin at 11:30. So it's going to be a ceremonial event. We would like everybody to attend and wear your orange shirt if you can. This is really important to me because it has to do with boarding schools. And this happened in Canada, where a young girl was not able to wear her orange shirt while she was in boarding school. This is a huge traumatic event that is known to our community and other Indigenous peoples in the United States and in Canada. So you are invited to be a part of this honoring of the Orange Shirt Day on the 29th to show support for our Native Indigenous sisters and brothers all over the world, with showing your support with wearing an orange shirt. Come down. We have an amazing free lunch that will be down there, supported by the Beak. And the parade will start at noon. We ask you to join if you want to. It'd be great. And then, yeah, after that, when we meet at Chitkaquan, there'll be a free lunch available. So thank you. I succeed my time.
So Dan, since you yell at us for microphones, do I get to yell at you for cell phones? I know. Can't hear me, can't hear the cell phone. Anyone else for persons to be heard this evening? Seeing none, that'll bring us on to consent agenda. Deputy Mayor, I would ask for recusal on this item as my business does have a business relationship with Northern Lights.
Sure, no problem. So that brings us to the consent agenda. Can we have a motion?
I move to approve the following marijuana license renewal application submitted by Northern Lights Indoor Gardens LLC and forward to the Marijuana Control Board without objection. One, a standard marijuana cultivation facility license for 1321 Sawmill Creek Road, Suites M and O P, and a retail store license for 1321 Sawmill Creek Suites N O and P.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none. Back to the assembly. Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve these licensees, Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
and Mr. Peck.
Yes.
The motion passes 6-0 on item A.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that one. And that does bring us to new business item B. Before we go forward with item B, we do need to recalculate the spreadsheets this evening. So while it is a bit before our normal break, I'd like to give Sarah the time to do that. So if we could take a 5-minute break or so and allow Sarah the time to recalculate. Thank you. All right, thank you for that, everybody. We do have a updated spreadsheet that you can see up on the screens around the room now. So tonight, the assembly is gathered to award our fiscal year 24 annual general fund nonprofit grants. So if we have a motion to get this started.
Yeah, I move to award the following FY 24 general fund nonprofit grants in the category of human services. Braveheart Volunteers, $8,381. Sitka Counseling and Prevention Services, $7,381. And Southeast Alaska Independent Living, $8,881.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to award those three organizations the amounts stated and shown up on the screen. Is there any public comment? Back to the assembly for deliberation on the averages. Back to the assembly to deliberate on the motion. And I would just say that the average, the dollar amounts on the screen there are the averages of the awards of each assembly member. Deliberation on the award totals. Sarah?
All right, on the motion to award the following FY 24 general fund nonprofit grants in the category of human services, Braveheart Volunteers, $8,381, Sitka Counseling and Prevention Services, $7,381, and Southeast Alaska Independent Living, $8,881. Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
and Mr. Pike.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0 on the human services category.
Okay, I move to award the following FY 24 general fund nonprofit grants in the category of cultural and educational services. Alaska Arts Southeast, the Sitka Fine Arts Camp, $4,262. Outer Coast, $4,333. And the Sitka Music Festival, $1,690.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to award those three in the amounts stated. Is there any public comment? Back to the assembly.
I have a question in a sense. I mean, I'm looking at this and I have to admit that I took the easy way out and split it 3 ways, but I noticed that a couple of members had a zero amount for the music festival. And I'm just wondering what the logic was there.
For me, it was one of the, sorry, it's JJ. We are on an island far away. It costs money to get people to come here. Didn't have as strong of a basis for me as we are giving scholarships to Sitka's youth. And we are here to promote service amongst our high schoolers to give back to this community.
Kevin?
I would just this kind of goes for all of them. For those listening, my mentality behind my numbers was I took the total amount available for each category. I subtracted 10% from that and then divided equally among those who applied. It's very difficult for me to decide who is the valuation. It seems subjective. They're all, good. So that's what I did. And that's why, my reasoning behind it.
Sarah on the motion?
All right, on the motion to award the amounts for cultural and educational services, Alaska Arts Southeast, $4,262, Outer Coast, $4,333, and Sitka Music Festival, $1,690. Mayor Eisenbeiß,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
and Mr. Pike.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0.
I move to award the following FY24 general fund nonprofit grants in the category of community development. The Greater Sitka Chamber of Commerce, $2,143, and the Sitka Trail Works, $7,286.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to award those two organizations the amount stated. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, back to the assembly. On this one, I just want to make the assembly aware on the Sitka Chamber of Commerce's award amount. I have been attending the Emerging Leaders Program that they've put on. While I haven't received any monetary gain, I think I've had some French fries at one of the events. So I doubt they bought me off with some French fries, but I just wanted to say I have been attending those events. Anything else on the award amounts? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to approve the community development grant awards, Greater Sitka Chamber of Commerce, $2,143, and then Sitka Trail Works, $7,286. Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Ms. Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
and Mayor Eisenbeiss.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0.
And then with years past, as there is a little bit remaining, that'll just get wrapped up into the emergency fund. So it'll put that just over $5,000. So if anyone has those later in the year, they can apply for those. That'll bring us on to item C tonight, which is a discussion direction decision of the municipal administrator's annual recommendation of transfer to the public infrastructure sinking fund. John, this might be the best news we have from you all year. What a large surplus we have to transfer into the sinking fund in order to start putting back into our roads and other municipal infrastructure that desperately needs the work. So appreciate the staff getting us to this point, appreciate the surplus. And I believe you and Melissa Haley have a presentation on this one. Or maybe not, or.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And if most of you do want to come up, that's fine. I'm happy to talk through this. So as required by our code and our charter, I'm coming forward with our surplus and an analysis on what is available in our unrestricted fund balance and a recommended amount to go to our public infrastructure sinking fund that we use to tackle some of our capital projects and our maintenance needs. So I'm actually very proud of the news that we're finding out in this, and I attribute that to the great work of Melissa and her team with some very conservative budget estimates. You know, we've always been able to present a balanced budget with some good risk mitigation measures in there. I think we do a great job with outlining to the community exactly where their dollars are going, which is evident on our homepage, our financial transparency, and the live spending links that you can click on and see where everything's going. But that said, we've had some pretty historic returns on our sales tax figures this year. You know, there's a lot of factors involved in that. Tourism is one of them. So we're looking to transfer generally 4.5 million. Sorry, I'm speaking in the round terms here. About 4.5 million into our public infrastructure sinking fund. And that leaves us I would say an unrestricted fund balance is at around 8 million, Melissa. And I'd also like to point out that just over the past 3 years, you know, after the return of tourism and after COVID, and granted, yes, there were some federal grant dollars that were a part of this, and we had to delay some projects during COVID because of the uncertainties. But over the past 3 years, it's been 2.6 million transferred, then 5 million transferred last year, and now potentially another 4.5 million this year. So over these last 3 years, we're looking at $12.1 million that are going directly back into our infrastructure here. So I'm really happy with those numbers, and I hope the assembly can support the recommendation. Did I get it?
Thank you. Appreciate that. Discussion from the assembly. Tor and then Kevin.
Well, I agree, it's nice, and I'm reminded when you first started, you talked about how at your previous job, you had kind of like the list of alligators, and you were trying to get the worst ones, and I'm hoping that you're starting to see a few alligators dying, or at least potentials for a few alligators getting taken care of because of this. And so, and I know that if we added up all the list, it was around 100 million last time I heard, but we couldn't do those. Even if we had 100 million, we don't have the manpower to do those jobs. So
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to say thank you. And I think this is a cause. This is for celebration. This is a wonderful thing. And I'm going to say something that I've said to a lot of people. I feel like it's a broken record, but I feel like it needs to be said, and especially for those listening who might not be aware of this. A lot of people who've heard it, I've already heard it over and over again, not just by me, but by others. But the state of Alaska during, when the oil money was flowing, and they call it the Ted Stevens years, a lot of money came to the state, and the state built many multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects throughout the state in all sorts of towns, cities, towns, villages. And, obviously these aren't the days anymore. And when the money started drying up, the city or the state gifted those projects to all these communities. Well, now we're at what, 40, 50 years on, and those projects are due to either be replaced or repaired significantly. And the problem that we forget, because we're busy in our own lives, right, is that the communities in Alaska didn't have the money in the first place to pay for those themselves. So now we are in the predicament of having to pay to repair millions of dollars. I don't have the number on me, but we have many millions of dollars of projects that need to be fixed or repaired. And so we're trying to find ways to pay for it. And personally, I've tried to, push for grants and then, business economic activity. But this, in my mind, is one of the ways we start to pay for this. As a friend said a couple years ago or something, it just, the bill's been growing and growing, and now the bill's due. So we got to find a way to pay for this. This is how we do it. For several years before the, as John said, we weren't putting any money into this fund. This fund is building, and we have a plan. John calls it a matrix, I believe, risk analysis matrix. So we can start putting this money to projects to fix it. And in my mind, this is a way to do it without adding an unbearable tax burden on people. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but this is a cause for celebration. This is a wonderful thing. And I think a lot of times we get kind of focused on what we're doing, and that's normal, but we need to take a moment to recognize the good things that are happening in this community. And this is a very, very good thing. I just want to publicly say very proud and grateful and thankful that we're able to do this. Thank you.
Anything further from the assembly? I kind of follow along the same lines, John. It's absolutely amazing to be able to reinvest back into our infrastructure. And Kevin, earlier you'd said that you were pushing for economic activity in order to get to this point. Well, this is the fruits of economic activity. This is a surplus in sales tax that has led us to this point that allows us to be able to fund our schools to the maximum ability. It allows us to start to fix the potholes on our streets. I can't guarantee your particular pothole will get filled, but I'll give you Harry Green's cell phone number, and you can blow him up on that to get that on the list. But this allows us to start reinvesting back into the community and fixing those things that I sat many years on this assembly and wasn't able to help out with. So it's a welcome change. It's a refreshing change. And I do appreciate the amounts going forward, and then the plans to work on them in a most advantageous way to the community. Sarah? Or no, I guess we need a motion, don't we? There is no motion on the floor. Someone had a motion?
I move to transfer 4.5 million to the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund and make this transfer effective June 30th, 2023.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to transfer $4.5 million to the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund. Is there any public comment? Anything further from the assembly? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to transfer 4.5 million to the Public Infrastructure Sinking Fund, Mr. Yestad,
Yes.
Mr. Pike,
Yes.
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mayor Eisenbeiss,
Yes.
Mr. Mosher,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
and Ms. Carlson.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-0 on item C.
Item D this evening.
I move to authorize the municipal administrator to pursue a funding opportunity and advocate to the Department of Energy for advanced district energy heating and from renewable resources and expanded supervisory control of the electrical system.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the ordinance. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. John, did you have anything on this one? I know I'm kind of in the dark on it. I don't know. Cord, perhaps, do you have some more information on this one for us?
And present it, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Cord Christensen with the Election Department. It's not often that you get a phone call from the federal government saying, hey, we have a $4.5 million grant. Would you be interested in receiving it? This was a grant given to another Alaskan community for renewable district heating. With our work on ETIP and other conversations with the National
Thank you for that. Any questions for Mr. Christensen while he's up here? JJ?
What is an interruptible load?
Okay, in code, the electric department can provide electric hot water heat.
Mhm.
Right now, it's to the school buildings, some of the other municipal city-state building. The only non-CPS building right now is the US Post Office. The electric rate varies depending upon what the price of fuel is. It goes a certain percent of what CBS's cost of fuel is. And overall, it ends up being about 80% of what the alternative fuel cost. So for instance, schools that have electric boilers, their preference is to run electric boilers because it costs less than fuel. But as an interruptible load, we, the electric department, own, operate, and maintain the boiler. We can turn it off whenever we need to manage our load. And then they automatically go back on, I wouldn't say automatically, manually go back onto fuel oil. And we, looking at kind of past records, the buildings that we both supply with interruptible heat right now and those that don't, we could probably save an additional 50,000 gallons a year of municipal fuel by adding interruptible boilers, and probably bring in, let's say, order of magnitude with today's fuel prices, another $250,000 of revenue. And that revenue offsets revenue requirements that might be normally put into a rate increase. And again, those go up and down, but historically, since the Blue Lake expansion, on average, the electric department has received about $250,000 of additional revenue by selling this interruptible power. It is discounted from normal power, but otherwise it's just water spilling over the dam. In the past year, we brought in $750,000, $750,000, because fuel prices were high in the past year. So again, it goes down and up, but even at that higher rate, it is still a cost incentive to the facilities to run interruptible heat as opposed to fuel oil.
And the request is to put all of these different boilers around town in a network.
Yes, so right now we have a total of 7 buildings that are in that network. Normally you think of district heating as being hard piping between buildings. In this case, we're using our transmission distribution lines to move that power around. So that's the pipe. And so we have it, one at the high school, the junior high school, Keat Elementary, City State Building, wastewater treatment plant, US Post Office, and the City State Building.
Is the airport getting one in this renovation?
That would be one of the things that we would be able to include. We think as part of this, again, we haven't asked too many questions of DOE yet until we get the green light to discuss. But in principle, our understanding is yes. And the one caveat is that those buildings that have interruptible heat have to be able to go back onto fuel oil if we turn them off, so that they don't come back on the electrical system. And a good example of that was when we did Green Lake Phase 1 refurbishment. We started April 15th, which was towards the end of the heating season. We had to run the entire town on Blue Lake only because Green Lake was 100% down and we had to reduce load. And with all of the interruptible boilers off, that reduced our load by over 3 megawatts and allowed us to operate just on Blue Lake without having to run diesels.
Thank you.
Any other question?
So Court, is it hopeful that with this it'll make it easier for private entities to do the same thing, or?
Right now, by code, the interruptible boilers have a minimum size of 100 kW, which probably limits smaller entities. At the same time, depending upon what happens on the controls and what may be happening on some smart metering, that may be a possibility. But again, we need to dive into the details.
Kevin?
Thank you, Cord, for putting this forward. I appreciate it. I like it in concept, but I have a couple questions and concerns. Biggest one is around the match. It says $1.5 million match. But then it says matching funds can be made through in-kind contributions and synergies with previously dedicated projects that have not been realized. These funds would come from Electrical Capital Fund and the CPV Commercial Passenger Vessel Excise Tax. So haven't we been going, like the Green Lake project, isn't that a huge priority? And so I'm concerned about taking 1.5 million that could go to that and putting it towards this.
So Melissa and Grant, maybe if you could come up and help explain the financial side. Part of the money would be coming, yes, out of the electric department for some things that we were planning on doing anyway that are non-Green Lake related, but still system control upgrades. But things like the cruise ship passenger tax, some of the IT expenses that would essentially be saved by fiber connecting various buildings would be coming from other funds.
So, a portion of the 1.5 million match, and we don't know, this came up so quickly, we don't have good numbers right now. So we don't know exactly what that match would be. We would have to justify any portion that came from the CPV funds. And what we're thinking would be justifiable is really the connections between the city buildings, because our network has been so impacted by cruise passengers that it's really slowing down daily operations. So we would have to figure out that portion. We don't know yet what portion it would be. You are totally right that Green Lake is a big priority. We are seeking all sorts of other federal funding for Green Lake. So I think there's a lot of things out there. We do have some working capital set aside. The electric fund, as the general fund is, it's on a much healthier path right now. We are generating revenue, but the Green Lake project is a big one, and it is a priority project. So there's a lot of balancing going on.
Okay, is it, I like I said, I like the concept, but I'm concerned that we don't have the numbers. A thought that came to my mind is about possibly tentatively going forward with this, but until we not officially do it, formally doing it until we get more numbers. I have really big concerns about pulling money that we might need for Green Lake. That is a big concern. Because although we're applying for grants and we should, there's no guarantee we will get them.
And anything does have to come forward for a supplemental appropriation that would be approved by the assembly. So before, a single dollar is spent, that would take place.
I think if I can clarify that, given the green light to negotiate, we will work out both the details, the scope, so that there is a much more defined where the monies are coming from, what funds, so forth. But we haven't had those discussions with DOE and NREL because we didn't know whether we had the green. I mean, this isn't normal where you apply for a grant and then you hope you get awarded. They're saying, look, this was for somebody else, but we like the idea of renewable district heating. You're doing some of the same things. Would you be willing to accept it? And yes, in general, you can change things, but if you're adding controls, if you're adding additional district heating, we think that it can be substituted.
Hey, and then that brings up another question I had. Sorry, one more question. So do you know why the other community withdrew?
They had a conglomeration of a number of universities, other manufacturers who were involved, and I think that there was a problem getting everyone to play well together. And this was awarded 2 years ago, or award for negotiation, and they came to us 3 weeks ago.
So this is really in the infancy stages as far as really ironing out all the numbers and how it's going to work out.
Right, I mean, the topic area one was renewable district heating. And I even remember reading it 2 years ago and just saying, look, they're talking about pipes and other biomass. This isn't something for Sitka. And was surprised when this other community basically wrote their grant and were using the power lines as the pipeline, but they too were using hydro for district heat. Other than they didn't own the boilers like we do.
Thank you.
Please.
I think this is probably a question for Melissa. Do we know yet that we can use the CPV funds for a part of this match, or are we kind of presuming a little bit?
We are presuming.
Okay.
This would be, another project that we would consider, that we would, run by the cruise line agencies beforehand. I think given the well-known impact to the internet speeds in Sitka, it would very likely be a justifiable one.
Okay, and then maybe this one's for Cord. I was concerned when I first read that we don't really have estimates for the fiber optic. But then I kind of kept reading and it's looking like it'll be, it says a significant portion of the match. So you're thinking around $1 million or something like that for laying in the fiber?
I think that our very much back of the envelope number is maybe 700,000.
Okay.
But that's,
It-
we're still talking with IT, which buildings need to be connected. What other projects do we have? For instance, it would be throwing in some conduit on the seawalk so that we can run between here and City Hall. And so we've got a lot of routing to work out and other things, but again, back of the envelope.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I do have a pretty substantial list of questions here, so hopefully we can work through those. Melissa, the first one's going to be somewhat in your direction, and I apologize because I know you've had about as much time to look at this as the assembly has. But what effect do you anticipate that this would have on ratepayers? i.e., are we going to have to raise rates in the near term in order to pay for this 1.5 million?
I don't think there would be much of a rate increase. It could definitely improve some operations. But we're also now, our rates have really leveled out in terms of the projected increases going forward. And this is not that, this, if we had to fund the whole thing, yes, that could impact rates. But, given we don't have a great picture of exactly what needs to be replaced when for electric. But with what we know, it would fall in line with kind of placeholders that we have in
Okay.
there.
Thank you. And then, so Cord, on this one, as I've stated before, and you've said as well, that, this is pretty short notice and pretty impromptu. So then where does this fall into your electrical master plan? Because then the master plan also gets at rate increases as well.
Yes, and one point of clarification, the grant is over 36 months. So it's not like it all has to come up all at once. It's over a 3-year period of time. But one of our requests on our C2C grant is how do we optimize our control system to reach 100% utilization? And though that is technical assistance, it's not for equipment and hardware. This would help pay for that after we receive the technical, if we receive the technical assistance from the national labs. So it's in the big picture of things, but no, we weren't planning on doing it immediately. But when the grant opportunity came up and sort of looking at, well, what could we do with this amount of money and how could we generate additional revenue so that there wouldn't be rate increases, if anything else, it would help stabilize them.
Okay, so my point for the assembly, if this isn't in the master plan, is there a better use of this money? Is this something that we actually need to be doing at this point? Or do we follow along the master plan, which we've already laid out and the assembly has dedicated funding for with our rate increases as we go forward? Cord, I've heard in the past that the department's a little bit stressed right now. We don't have that much manpower. Is that safe to say?
Yes, I think that with what Scott Elder leaving and so forth, we are a bit short on manpower. And frankly, if we were to get this, part of that would go to add staff so that we
Okay,
could.
so then my question on that one, so what's fallen to the side? What projects are we not currently working on in order to help facilitate this project happening?
We haven't worked out the exact scope of what this project is. And so I can't say other than we know we have some manpower issues that we need to address were we to get this, but again, without a green light from the assembly encouraging us to negotiate with DOE and NREL, we haven't looked much further than that.
Yeah, because
And-
my concern is when a citizen turns on their light switch, I want them to get power. I don't necessarily want at this point an easier way to shift loads. I think that can be accomplished in the manner that it is happening now. However, the citizen is my ultimate goal. I need them to have their power reliably and daily. Is there any guarantee that the future electrical director is even going to be on board with this plan? It seems kind of out there if another entity doesn't necessarily want it. And I guess for the assembly's sake, like I'm concerned when we're bringing on a director here, hopefully shortly, is this the direction they want to head? Is this their goals as well? So we may be committing someone down a path where they strongly don't agree with that purpose. I would argue that the use of CPV funds for this is going to be a stretch. If we are able to, I would be very, very surprised. I think that one would be argued. Cord, you mentioned adding boilers in order to increase some monetary savings. From what money pot would we be adding those boilers?
It would come from the grant funding. So, I mean, basically the grant funding, for every $1 we put up, they put up $2, and that would be part of the total 4.5 million that the grant would provide.
Okay, and then I think my last point, I don't know if it's really a question, more of a point for the assembly, but in the fiscal note, it does say that we'll save about $140,000 annually with a cost of 1.4 million. I find that to be a pretty low return on investment. And I wonder if our funds are better invested somewhere else or we do get a little bit higher return on that. So I think it's one of those, this is a nice to have project. I think if our electrical fund had, 9 cents a kilowatt hour rates right now and a function or a fully up to date transmission and distribution system that we could. But to me, this feels like a nice to have. Not necessarily a need to have. So thank you for those answers. Tim?
Sure, thank you. So the high school is on one of the interruptible boilers, and I remember when it was put in, and I remember the conversation around the school board table. Because, you know, one of the big expenses for the schools is energy. And so when these boilers came in, we were able to realize some savings at the school district because the boilers were cheaper to operate. And I think, you know, I mean, you can look at this a bunch of different ways. The more boilers we put in, the less fuel oil we burn as a community. So, you know, I think those are things to think about going forward as well. And connections and so forth and control panels, I mean, that's a really important piece to this puzzle, I think. At this point in time, this is such a broad stroke thing. I'm encouraging us to look forward to doing this, look at this and see what this looks like. It's going to come back to us. And if the funding sources don't make sense and we can't get the money in it, you know, I think the questions and comments we're making right now are really something we don't know the answer to. And we're asking them to answer those questions when they don't know them either. So I guess I'm encouraging us to go forward. I know for the interruptible boilers, they're really an important piece going forward for doing this. I know the Coast Guard did biomass heaters, I think, in order to get off of that. I mean, if we can get the airport on interruptible boilers, we can get other major entities on these things, you know, maybe even the hospital at some point. I mean, these are things that can A, use up our excess capacity, and B, cut down on fuel oil in our community. I mean, I don't see how this is a bad idea to look at. So I'm encouraging us to look at this at least, because it sounds like that's what you're asking, because we don't know what this is going to look like yet. And, you know, we may get to the end of this and say, hey, that doesn't make our sense for our community. Thank you. Send it to somebody else. But, you know, I think at this point in time, I'd really like to see if we can figure this thing out, because it changed a lot about the high school and the school district's finances when we went to this thing. And as far as I know, they really haven't been cut off very often. So only for things like the Blue Lake project, because or Thanksgiving, you know, when everyone's cooking their turkey or something. Crystal?
I have a couple of questions. A lot of the concerns have already been brought up. So also in that basket of strategic plan or master plan, where does this fall within that? That didn't come through clear in the memo. So I think that's why we have those questions related to those. But I also read in the memo that it will be brought forward again as a resolution if the money is awarded to the city. Do you know a timeline of when this is going to come back before us for consideration?
I really don't. I haven't had clarification from DOE NREL because again, I haven't wanted to pester them with a bunch of questions until we had a green light from the assembly.
Okay, because I think.
But I think it would be fairly quick.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a quick timeline. It sounds like you said, it was very odd to get this phone call saying, do you want this pot of money? Don't want to turn that down. Do want the numbers associated. So the resolution may not go into that detail, but when you guys present this and say, we've been awarded the money, do we want to accept it? Will you have a better idea if it's eligible to go through existing funding pools, or when will that information become clear to us?
I think at that point, likely the resolution is going to be asking the assembly to make a commitment. It may not, but a lot of the federal grants require that. So at that point, we would have things a lot more nailed down and be coming forward. And certainly before any appropriation was made, you would know exactly where all of the funds were coming from.
And then just hearing, not sure the scope of the project, like that still needs to develop as well. So again, the questions came up early and I think we all read the same memo and we're all at the same place. I don't want to turn down a funding source, but I don't know, and I won't be here, but when it comes back, I think it'll be interesting to see how much information comes through those conversations. So I'm open to it at this point in time. And I appreciate you coming up here. I know this has been a quick turnaround for you guys too, and you're trying to present it to us without all of the information. And we keep on begging you to give us all the information right now, and you just don't have it. So I think we can move forward to pursue and see what this looks like, what the scope would be, whether or not matching sources would be eligible to support that match that's required. All of those questions still need to be answered, but thank you for bringing this before us.
And just one point of clarification, the 140,000 a year savings is through lease lines. So that's kind of coming out of the IT. There'd be a certain amount from the CPAC. And then our guesstimate is the additional revenue from additional inoperable boilers or better control of our existing ones would be about 250,000.
Tor?
Yeah, so as I'm listening here, the first thing that comes to mind is I kind of agree with Tim there that we lose nothing by finding out the rest of the information. I mean, by getting the negotiations down and figuring out exact nailing down what we're allowed, what we can do, we don't lose anything there. And the other thing that strikes me is that having been holed up with Grant trying to make my iPad work when we were talking, is that the fiber optic's gonna happen. And so we're gonna have to pay for that one way or the other. And that's a big hunk of our match. And I don't know if CPEP, if we can put that into CPEP, but it doesn't really matter because from what I'm told is that if we don't do something that, things are fast approaching a critical juncture there. So I don't see any loss in saying, go find out the rest, get the negotiations. And like you said, it has to come before us at least once, if not twice, between the resolution and any appropriation. And other than Crystal bragging that she's not going to be here, I just don't see any downside to at least finding out and getting the details down. And it may not work out for us, but we have no downside to finding out exactly what the details are. So I think we should go for it at this point. And, like all these kind of things, we'll have multiple chances to say no if it doesn't pencil out for us.
John?
I'm very split on this, which is why it's in front of you. With all of our projects, we try to risk score things and rank them. And the mayor and I every year make a DC lobbying trip and we talk about Green Lake. And we've sat in DOE's office. I have, our DOE's office is, I have a call scheduled later this week through our lobbyists trying to get in touch with some of DOE's leadership. And my concern is not necessarily with the project. It's with the direction that the agency seems to be heading. And I agree, it's great to see where this could go. But again, my concern is that I've been told that they're not interested in helping us with our deferred maintenance, the things that are high on our risk list. They like the shiny, they like the new, they like the innovative, and that's great. And there's lots of savings that could come from that potentially. But in the meantime, for Green Lake specifically, I mean, we took a loan for phase 1 and we're considering applying for another loan for phases 2 and 3, or looking at the section 247 grant possibility. When I look at what the high priority is, it's, at least we've been screaming at the DC desks that it's Green Lake. And also Blue Lake, we talk about the penstock work and the potential lining of the tunnel. I want to make sure that DOE is legitimately wanting to help us with our needs, because they said that in the C2C grant award. I made sure that I mentioned that at the table. One of the comments from the deputy director was that this program, they were excited to hear what communities need and how they could help them get there. So I in this process, as it moves forward, if it moves forward, I plan on speaking with DOE's leadership to make sure that they're helping us with the things we need assistance with.
Chris?
This question actually might be for you, John. So let's just say that we went down this road, we went after this grant, we got it. Could it potentially hurt us for getting future grants for our maintenance needs?
So is the question, if we received it, could it hurt us? Or if we
Yeah,
did not
could they
receive
be
it?
like, well, you got a grant for this other project,
I I don't know. I mean, I would
I know
say
it's a lot of
ETIP,
speculation.
we performed well on ETIP, which is why they take the interest in us now. And I think that's why we were also awarded the C2C grant. It's not a linear formula
Yeah, I
for
know.
all of them, but there's also risks too. If you say, no, I don't want your money, then that could also hurt us for future grants. So there's a lot to consider here. I'll just repeat that my main concern is that DOE is listening to what we need and helping us with what we need.
JJ?
If DOE came to us on this, we probably or hopefully have room to negotiate on some things. That would be my take, but I come from the corporate world. 33% is a pretty strong match. If that could get reduced, 36 months, that's really fast to spend this amount of money when we don't have scoping done. Are those things in your conversations, Cord, that there is any movement on, or are these strong parameters?
With the brief conversation that I had, the impression was that don't change the total dollar amount, don't change the percentages, keep the dollars and the time frame where there are. If you need to change manufacturers, percentage of labor, whatever that part of the scoping, there's lots of flexibility. So, but again, that was probably a short 2-3 minute conversation without much detail.
If 4.4 million can get us a boiler at the airport, then let's do it with granting money there. But it just doesn't, with construction what it is, it just doesn't seem like we could get this going with this parameters. I'm just not seeing it work in that time frame. And if there was just one more piece of this now tonight to give more confidence, sure. If there's some way to kind of draw out and have it be maybe 3 different awards, one for estimating and scoping, and if we liked it, we could move to the next phase. And if that was good, we can move to the next phase. But
And I think looking at the previous community's proposal, and I can't say I've gone through all the detail, but yes, they do want to know what's year 1, year 2, year 3. And I believe that there is some sort of pass go. You have to show performance in year 1, in part to get year 2, to get year 3. But I don't know for sure. Some grants are that way. Others aren't. But we can propose, I believe, as much or as little as we want in year 1 and double up on year 3. If that's what seems to make sense, both project time-wise and whatever else is going on. Or we may accelerate fiber between the buildings right now while we're working on design of other parts of the system.
if it takes a year to get a transformer, there's little confidence here with electrical systems that much can get done in 3 years for major overhauls and controls for renewable communications. And it would be great, but there's just a vision here. And in order for at least me to make a decision at this assembly table, it's got to be past vision. I mean, if it was a strategic plan document, sure. But if it's asking for over $1 million to more or less happen at the beginning-ish, that's just a big ask. If we could see this again in 2 weeks with more investigation that was consultants' time because the department is stretched with labor.
I would think that we could maybe get some input from DOE, but very limited. It would be more if we're given the green light to negotiate. It may take us 4 to 6 months to come back with a full detail. of what that is and what it's negotiated. I think we somewhat dictate the speed on how fast. I mean, yes, I think DOE NRO would like to award it right away, but if we say, look, this is what we need to go 0 to 4.5 million, we need the time. They would have that flexibility.
And my guess is that's 4 to 6 weeks of your time. And if you weren't working on this, we'd probably have things in the strategic plan that would occupy your time. And that's the pinch point for me. It's like, who does this work?
There would be a number of people putting together preliminary things beyond myself. And some of that would be IT, finance, so forth. I mean, it would be a team effort, but it would not happen in weeks. It would happen in months.
That's true.
Anything further at this point for our presenters? Great. Thank you both for your time this evening. I appreciate it. Anything further from the assembly on this opportunity? Sarah?
All right, on the motion to authorize the municipal administrator to pursue a funding opportunity and advocate to DOE for advanced district energy heating from renewable resources and expanded supervisory control of the electrical system. Ms. Carlson,
No.
Mayor Eisenbeis,
No?
Ms. Duncan,
Yes.
Mr. Christensen,
Yes.
Mr. Yestad,
No.
Mr. Pike,
Yes.
and Mr. Mosher.
No.
Okay, the motion fails, 3-4.
Thank you. We do have just a couple items left this evening. Does the assembly wish to charge through, or it has been an hour since we've had a break? Seeing no one jumping up for a break, that would bring us to persons to be heard. This is public participation for any item on or off tonight's agenda, not to exceed 3 minutes for any individual.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Assembly, city staff, and attending public. I'm Charles Dean, and my comments, I think, are in parallel to the resolution that was reaffirmed earlier in the meeting. Now, having been born in the United States, I am by definition a Native American. And in that spirit, I'd like to wish those in earshot a forthcoming happy Columbus Day. Now, the individual in question there was an intrepid mariner who introduced with his crew through great cost a civilization not only unparalleled on the continent, but in this hemisphere. And it is a civilization that we enjoy today. Thanks.
Anyone else for persons to be heard? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports. Between myself and the administrators tonight, I think we have pretty extensive reports, so I'll try and work through mine quickly. However, I do believe Southeast Conference was a massive success. I believe I got quite a bit out of it, and I believe the administrator did as well. And I guess I was just reminded of, the years that I've spent going to events like this. Now they're starting to pay off because we now know the players in the games. We know who to talk to, and we have those introductions already to where we can have sidebar conversations with those people and actually move our municipality forward. So I didn't always feel that way about conferences as the new guy. I kind of felt outside of that loop, but we are very much inside that loop right now. And I'm super excited for some of the progress that we've made just in small sidebar conversations. Number one, I actually did get an opportunity with the governor's chief of staff, who he sent down here. One of the governor's big movements this year is going to be to try and get state lands into the hands of municipalities. So I reaffirmed our desire for the Indian River Valley property that the state does own. And that while of course he can't do anything with that, said, yes, let's talk about this. This is exactly what the governor is looking for to move forward. He also reaffirmed that the governor wants to put more power back in the hands of municipalities, more control. So I don't know exactly what that would look like, but an easy one you could think of would be, say, alcohol taxes. One I did talk to him about was a homestead exemption as well. If we could potentially raise the level of the homestead exemption and kind of play with our property taxes a little bit more in order to incentivize year-round residency here. So we will be following up on that. We had opportunities to speak with DOT about airport issues. Those are very, very wide ranging, and I don't pretend to know half the scope of them, but John and staff have been working really well. And I think we at least had a face-to-face on that and made some progress. I did have conversations with multiple visitors bureaus and a couple cruise line as well, talking about how we educate better visitors. How do we get a visitor who doesn't run out in front of your car so you're not slamming on the brakes? How do we get a visitor who, and I kind of liken it back to in Alaska, when you go into a home, everybody takes your shoes off. We know that happens here. That's the cultural norm, but that doesn't happen everywhere. So how do we better educate visitors on the cultural norms of Alaska so that when they do come, that they are a much better visitor? I think some ideas were floated. There was a cruise line that was interested in even handing out a pamphlet if we were able to compile that. So I think some work will be made at that. DOT is also reaffirmed that they are going to continue to do some work on the traffic revisions at our downtown stoplight to continue to make that safer, extending some of the lines, putting up some more signage. I don't know that this is going to go anywhere, but there was a recorded speech from Senator Lisa Murkowski, possibly talking about the PSVA that makes cruise ships stop in Canada, getting a permanent exemption for that. It sounds as if that might be a non-starter, but I think there may be a will to get that permanent exemption, which we enjoyed during COVID times. A kind of interesting fact. So we had a presentation about housing, not unknown to everybody. Housing is an issue in Sitka, housing is an issue in Alaska, and housing is an issue nationwide. Households in Alaska grew 9% over the last several years. However, our population has dipped 1%. And so what's that showing is that there are less families in Alaska right now. I don't know if that's more retirees coming to the state, if that's more younger people before they have children. But when your household grows that much, when the individual housing grows that much and you don't get that population increase as well, that's something that the state on a state level is paying attention to. And kind of along those lines, Sitka shows that exact trend where we are adding more homes per 1,000 people than basically everybody in the state. We were number 2 on that list of new housing units added per 1,000 people, but we don't feel any relief from that crunch. So we're working towards an end state, but it's not getting any easier. And I can easily correlate that to households growing 9% with the population dip, because we see that here. So we're getting less and less families, perhaps part of a silver tsunami that we've heard about, but less of our school age kids, and our school teachers see the same thing. We have less. When I graduated, there was like 75 kids, and that was the smallest class we'd ever had. And I think now a class of 60 plus is a big normal class. So let's see. I was able to meet directly with cruise line representatives from Norwegian, Royal Caribbean, and also the CLIA representatives who actually came back to Sitka in order to sit down with myself and John and talk about the wrap up of this last year. And then finally, a big shout out to all of those who attended our awards banquet here and all the local sponsors. We had a goal to beat Ketchikan's amount. I guess I should preface this. The awards banquet, every dollar that's raised goes to UAS scholarship funds and allows people who may not be able to attend college. So our goal was to do better than Ketchikan did last year. Our goal is to always beat Ketchikan, as I reminded Scott Haberstead. But Ketchikan did $45,000, give or take, last year. And Sitka, in our conference, we were able to pull $62,000 for that scholarship fund. So we accomplished the goal there. And finally, everybody who attended Southeast Conference, again, was in awe of the community. They were super appreciative of the community. Little hitches and glitches here as to be expected, but I genuinely think people enjoy having that large conference here in town, and I hope that businesses also felt the effects. I forgot to remind people in my introductory speech, but I was going to encourage them to leave no trace. We have leave no trace here, except for their, instead of footprints, just leave their tax dollars and their bed tax dollars. So hopefully they did that. John?
Thanks, Mayor. As you already mentioned, Southeast Conference last week. I actually really enjoy attending that. I feel like a lot of work gets done at that every year, and I always leave very motivated. And it's because of those sidebar conversations, some of the expert panels that are up there. So I've got some notes, and I'll hit on some of the things that you didn't. The first one is Southeast Alaska by the numbers presentation. That's the one that everybody is excited about. And if you go to Southeast Conference website, the presentation is up there and it's publicly available. But I'd like to point out from that study done by Raincoast Data that Southeast Alaska scored an A for our economy. And it was a lot of good news. But it can't all be good news. So they had the three things that I'm sure everybody can guess is what is a challenge for us. It's childcare, housing, and finding the workforce necessary. Which, Mayor, you already addressed the housing. The number of houses are going up, but the population's going down. That's a bit of a challenge and confusing. But another interesting statistic is the state of Alaska is now ranked number 2 in the nation for the state for young people to work in. So I guess most young people don't need childcare or big housing, and they're looking for visitor jobs. So it does make sense in some respect. But it was just an interesting statistic. We talked about the visitor industry panel. We had some good conversations with the individual lines, as the mayor mentioned, and with CLIA. There was a big push for collaboration. And I think we're doing well there. We're really having a good two-way dialogue. It's not one side telling the other how tourism is or is not going to work. We're kind of giving our concerns to each other and trying to find a good way that works for both the industry and the local community. On the second day, the mayor and I had the opportunity to sit down with Senator Stedman and his staff, something we normally do in the wintertime, but since he was here and he had his finance staff with him, we got a conference room set aside and we talked through some of the capital project needs here in Sitka. And, we'll be submitting those through the CAPSA system as we do every year. And he kind of gave us some pointers on where we should focus to make sure those requests get through. Let's see. The last bit, because the mayor mentioned most of the other things, the last day, of course, we talked about broadband, and it was great to be able to showcase this while we were all here. Phones weren't working well. We had a lot of people in town. You could see the frustration in the conference with people trying to use the Wi-Fi signal that was in there. But the panel got up and talked about broadband, and they really talked about the federal opportunities out there. And they showed you might be familiar with the middle mile map. They showed the map from 2008, and then they showed today's map, and everything around Sitka changed, but the Sitka map is still exactly the same. So our middle mile has not really had any advances in technology since 2008. And we are on the outside, and you can understand how that would be challenging. And it seems to be that the answer I hear is Starlink is the answer, but I have a hard time going out to the community and saying, we understand that there's challenges with broadband, so I recommend you all go and just purchase Starlink. So while we were in the conference, we've heard that Sitka is served according to the definition of the FCC. It's 100 up, 100 down is served. If you're less than that, you're underserved. If you're less than 25 up and down, 25 megs up and down, you're considered not served. So I pulled my phone out. I did the speed test. Another person did the FCC speed test right next to me, and others in the conference pulled out their phones. And I was receiving 1.8 megabytes down, and the person sitting next to me was getting 3.3. So I was able to make my point very clearly there that we are not a served community when it comes to broadband, and we need to figure something out here. So hopefully that'll spur some better conversations. And then on the last day, when the conference ended, you all know I'm part of a group called the Port Communities of Alaska that really started with how do we get back to crews traveling safely after the pandemic. That group is we've kind of morphed into a regional type strategy group for what does cruising look like and cruise tourism look like in Southeast Alaska. And that group is really starting to organize better. And I think this is going to grow into something much bigger, like a Southeast Conference or like a CSWA, if you're familiar with that, Southeast Alaska Solid Waste Association, with a board and membership from other communities. So we can identify what our common themes are around cruising and cruise tourism. We can identify our common goals for collaboration, and we can kind of share the same message, because what we do in one community can affect another community. If one community says no boats here, they're going to go somewhere else. And it affects more than just us too. The Port of Victoria, they really do exist just because of Alaska tourism. So they're going to want a seat at the table as well. So we spent a good 4 or 5 hours on that last day, just talking about what do we want to accomplish and what are our next steps. And I think we're making some good progress there. So we'll have hopefully in the next, I would say, year to 2 years, a good, strong, common voice that we can use to communicate a regional strategy on cruising and just tourism in general in Southeast Alaska.
Thank you, Brian.
Your municipal attorney doesn't get invited to Southeast Conference. Therefore, I don't have much of a report other than I went to work all week last week. Thank you.
And some dandy work it was, I'm sure. Any liaison representatives? Chris?
Had our first harbor meeting the day after our last assembly meeting. So it was our first meeting back from our summer break. Introduced our new deputy harbor master, who is Mark Hodges, is replaced JJ. And then something I am particularly excited about is the repairs for the high load dock in Crescent will start next spring. So that excites me considering my Crescent boat. So that was the big news.
JJ?
Tourism Task Force engagement event that was going to be held this Thursday is postponed. Don't have a future date for that, but in case anyone heard me last time announce that, I'm just clarifying that it is not happening this week.
Sarah?
We are in full election mode in the clerk's office. Right now, we have early voting happening at here again. It's weekdays through Monday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. We've had a very low turnout for the election so far this year. In person, we probably had, I think it was about close to 200 voters today. So since 2020, we've had 800 to 1,000 people vote ahead of election day. So the numbers are very low. Another option besides early voting is to, well, that is no longer an option, to receive a ballot by mail. The last day to file was today if you wanted to vote by mail. But we do have the options of by fax or email, personal rep if you're not feeling well or you've had surgery or just not able to make it to the polls. You can send a personal rep to get a ballot for you. And then, of course, the polls will be open on Tuesday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Here at Harrigan. That's all I got.
Thank you. Any other reports this evening? Seeing none, that would bring us to adjournment.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you for your time this evening, Assembly. We are adjourned.